Alright, so we're going to cover the different kinds of conversions. Whether it's fractions, decimals, percents, we should be able to convert between all three. Now, first thing that we're going to talk about, you should write this in your notes, is going to be starting with decimals. If they give us a decimal first, we should be able to change it to both a fraction and a percent. Now, in the past, the way we went from a decimal, let's say it's 0.13. The way we changed this to a fraction was we drew a line underneath it, because every fraction has that line. We dropped that decimal as a 1, and we added zeros to every number to the right of the decimal, which would be 2 zeros. That gives me 13 over 100. Alright, so our steps were 1, draw the line, 2, drop the 1, and 3, add the zeros. Ooh. Okay? Now, that's how I described it to you as 7th graders. Alright? Broke it down very simply into 3 steps. That way you could remember those 3 steps and follow it one step at a time. You are now in 8th grade, so I'm going to show you a little shortcut. If you have, I'm going to give you a bunch of different ones. 1.13, 0.2, 0.502, 0.313. It doesn't matter what it is. I'll even throw that on there. If you want to throw it, if you want to make it a fraction real quick, count how many decimal places there are, and that's how many zeros you want to put in the denominator. If you have 1 decimal place, you want to put it over 10. If you have 2 decimal places, you want to put it over 100. Alright? It lets you know how many zeros there are. So, in this first one, 1.13, how many decimal places do I have? 2. So I'm going to say 113 over 100. 2 zeros for the 2 decimal places. Done. 0.502. I'm going to say 502 over 1,000. 3 decimal places, 3 zeros. It's quick, it's easy. Any questions on this? 0.2, how many decimal places? So what is it going to be? 2 over 10. And you can reduce that to 1/5. Right. The last one, how many decimal places? So I want 4 zeros, and then I just rewrite that number from the top. There you go. It ain't pretty. You can reduce that. But where we are right now, I just want to be able to make it into a fraction. And this is a fraction. Any questions there? All right. That took what we did last year and made it quicker. All right. Congratulations, you're in 8th grade. Hoorah. Okay? All right. So now we have decimal to fraction. Let's talk about decimal to percent. Decimal to percent. Now, y'all remember last year, what are we going to be using? Dr. Pepper. Now, we got in a real bad habit last year of when I asked you, how did we change something from a decimal to a percent, you go, ooh, Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper is not how we change it. Dr. Pepper shows us what we need to do to change from a decimal to a percent or a percent to a decimal. If you're going from decimal to percent, you're going to be moving that decimal one way or another. Okay? What Dr. Pepper does is show us what direction to move that decimal. All right? In this case, we're starting over here with a decimal. Everybody see that? Starting right down here. Then we want to move it over to percent. So what direction am I going to be moving? I'm going to have to move to the right, and I'm going to have to move 2 times. Dr. Pepper just showed you exactly how to go from decimal to percent. You're going to move the decimal 2 times to the right. The reason we use Dr. Pepper is sometimes you get confused whether you go right or left. Not if you write down dp. Alright, so makes it real simple. If I have 0.42, I'm going to go 2 times to the right. So 1, 2, I get 42%. Everybody see that? A lot of times last year you guys had trouble if I gave you something like 0.1. You would go, ooh, 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 1%. That's 1%. No, it's not. It is not 1%. You've got to move the decimal twice. 1 and 2. We have a blank right here, so we're going to put a 0 there. That gives me 10%. 0.1 is 10%, not 1%. Alright, don't get fooled. Any questions on that? Alright? Decimal to percent and percent to decimal should be the easiest things you do in a math class. It should almost be automatic. Okay? So, that being said, let's move on to talking about percents. Alright? Now, since we just finished talking about Dr. Pepper, let's start with it. We're going to go from percent to a decimal. Alright, so if we look down here at Dr. Pepper, we're starting over here with percent. So what direction do I need to move to get to the decimal? I'm going to have to go left 2 times. Alright, so if I have 5%, where's the decimal on 5%? Yeah, there is none, so it's understood that it's right there. Okay? We're going to move that twice, once and twice. We have a blank, so we add a 0. That gives me 0.05. All right. If you have 1.32%, I'm going to take my decimal and I'm going to move it once and twice to the left. I've got a blank, so I give it a 0. That gives me 0.0132. So, percent to decimal, decimal percent. You're going to be moving that decimal 2 times. Use Dr. Pepper to remember which direction to move it. Questions there? Okay. The other thing we get with percents, I want you to take a look at the word percent. Percent. Alright? We're going to break it down because we're going to go from percent to a fraction. So, cent. What word starts with cent? Think about time. Century. Alright? How many years are in a century? 100. That's a decade. Alright? Century has 100 years. How many cents are in a dollar? 100. What do you think cent means? It means 100. Alright? So, if it's per cent, what does that mean? Per 100. So if I have 5%, that means 5 per 100. You can take that percent and put it over 100. That gives you your percentage. Now, gives us some problems too. Let's take a look at some examples here. If I have, let's say 15%, 125%, 1.13%. Alright, let's take these 3. 15%, that means 15 per 100. 15 over 100. Looks good. 125%, that's 125 over 100. That looks good. 1.13%, that's 1.13 over 100. Does that work? No, we do not want decimals in our fraction. Okay? So, if you're going from percent to fraction, you can throw it over 100 if there's no decimals in the original percent. Since this has a decimal, we've got to do it a different way. Okay? Because we don't want to have decimals inside of our fractions. So, what we're going to do is, since this one has that decimal in there, we're going to change it to a decimal first, then we're going to change that decimal to a fraction. We already covered how to do that. So, 1.13%. What is that as a decimal?
0.113.
There we go. Move it twice, we get 0.0113. There's our decimal. We want to make that into a fraction. How many decimal places do I have? 4. So I want 4 zeros. And I'm going to just rewrite that number there. There you go. All right. You can use this bottom way every time. All right. If you don't want to just throw it over 100, you don't have to. You can use the bottom way. It's going to work out the same way every time. Okay. But if you don't have a decimal down here, I would just put it over 100. That makes it quick and easy. All right. 3% is 3 over 100. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Okay. So that covers decimals and percents. So we have fractions left over. That's what's left. Okay. First, let's go from a fraction to a decimal. And we're going to do something easy. We're going to say 1/4. You should know it in your head already. We did it for the warm-up. But fraction to decimal. As 8th graders, what you have to start learning is that this line right here means something. Does anybody remember from last year what that line means? It's division. Fractions are just division. 1/4 is the same thing as saying 1 divided by 4. Okay? 1/3 is the same thing as saying 1 divided by 3. When we get into algebra and the numbers start getting replaced with letters, if I want to say x divided by 2, I'm going to say x divided by 2. These division signs here are going to start disappearing. You're going to start being given fractions, and that's going to be where you get your division from. Okay? In fact, a lot of times if you look at a calculator, some calculators don't have this sign, do they? They have that little slash, right? That's to make a fraction. If you want to say 1 divided by 2, you say 1/2. You make a fraction out of it, right? Fraction means division. Once you figure that out, it becomes easy to convert because all you have to do to change it to a decimal is do the division. So if I started out with 1/4, what does that stand for? 1 divided by 4. All right? And I'm going to do the division. 4 does not go into 1, so I have to put a 0 there. All right? Now that I'm out of numbers, I've got to start adding on zeros, which means I've got to put a decimal. And make sure you put that decimal. 4 goes into 10 twice. Add another 0. 4 goes into 20 5 times. I now have 0.25. That's how you convert from a fraction to a decimal. You do the division. Okay? Now, the other way to remember it, where does the numerator go? Up top. That means the denominator goes on the bottom. Now, hopefully, you get to a point where you know if I'm going from fraction to decimal, I'm going to divide. At that point, some people get confused on which number goes inside the box. Well, what I say to them is N can stand for nice guy, and D can stand for dog. If you have a nice guy and a dog, which one are you going to let inside your house? The nice guy will go in here, the dog will stay outside. So if we go back to 1/4, the nice guy goes inside, the dog stays outside. Carry out your division, you'll get 0.25 again. Everybody understand converting from fraction to decimal? Okay? The only thing left is fraction to percent. To go from a fraction to a percent, you're going to do this right here, what we just did, change it to a decimal, and then just change your decimal to a percent. So what's 0.25 as a percent? 25%. So going from fraction to percent, you just follow the same steps and change your decimal to a percentage. Pretty simple stuff.